I will be breaking my talk into two parts today, with a bit of time to reflect in between the two. I first want to approach my idea through inquiry and then through myth. Now, I don't think it's a stretch to say that from the moment human consciousness dawned on a primate, that the human consciousness peered out and around, desperately seeking something else, something other than human, but with a human consciousness and a human conscience. We've invented gods and aliens and jinns and leprechauns and all manner of things pretending that they have consciousness of a human sort. Another living thing besides we humans that would somehow understand us and understand the world as we understand it. And often something else that would understand our morality. But somewhere deep inside, we've always known all of those are fantasies. We do our thinking about morality and reason and purpose in an unthinking universe. Your consciousness is your awareness of yourself and the world around you, awake, aware, responsive to stimulus. Your conscience, on the other hand, is what? In Latin, conscientia, with knowledge. Okay, with knowledge. But where does that knowledge come from? And oddly, the words sound so similar and are so difficult to untangle because they actually have a common Latin root, conscius, S-C-I-U-S, cius, knowing with others. Thus, for example, comatose people are not conscious. The person may or may not have awareness, but the awareness is not with someone else, other people. We see the difference as something that is a very big deal. And as I mentioned a couple of weeks back, our very being is socially constructed. We are because we are together. So consciousness and conscience. As I've said before, the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights from 1948 is about as close to Holy Writ as humanists ever get. Article 18 in that document says this: everyone has the right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion. This right includes freedom to change religion or unbelief, and freedom, either alone or in community with others and in public or private, to manifest religion or belief in teaching, practice, worship, and observance. End quote. We're supposed to be able to do all of that according to our conscience. Some think that conscience is inscribed on the heart by God, and Quakers have thought that and have called it the inner light. Others think that conscience is inscribed in the mind and in the body by genetics and social conditioning, a mixture of genetics and culture. Wherever it comes from, conscience tells us right from wrong. But what does it mean, and what does tell us mean in that kind of context? These are questions. To start, we inheritors of the Protestant Reformation have a special relationship with conscience. Our tradition has insisted upon it, and many have given their lives in its service. Now, central to that tradition, and probably the best articulation of it, is by Henry David Thoreau. For example, in 1849, Thoreau wrote a poem called Conscience, and here are a few lines from that. He said, "I love a soul not all of wood, predestined to be good, but true to the backbone unto itself alone, and false to none, born to its own affairs, its own joys and own cares, by whom the work which God begun is finished and not undone, taken up where he left off, whether to worship or to scoff. If not good, why, then evil. if not good God, good devil, end quote. Also in 1849, Thoreau wrote his greatest essay called Civil Disobedience. The inspiration of that essay has been in people such as Leo Tolstoy and Mahatma Gandhi and Martin Luther King. Thoreau writes this: "A very few, as heroes, patriots, martyrs, reformers in the great sense, and people serve the state with their consciences also, and so necessarily resist it for the most part, and they are commonly treated as enemies by it." He goes on to say, "Is there not a sort of blood shed when the conscience is wounded? Through this wound, a person's real humanity and immortality flow out, and the blood is an everlasting death. I see this blood flowing now," end quote. Yeah, our tradition takes conscience extremely seriously. Many in our tradition have served the state with their consciences, as Thoreau puts it, and so necessarily resisted it for the most part. One of my go-to definitions for humanism is that humanism is a way of thinking and living that focuses on human action in relation to the well-being of sentient beings and the planet. I believe we human beings are the sentient beings with a conscience on this planet, and that combination calls us to an ethics of responsibility and care for all the other sentient beings and the planet itself. That is our hope and our meaning and our purpose. Now, you may have seen or heard this past week about the editorial in the most recent New England Journal of Medicine. And it starts this way, quote, "COVID-19 has created a crisis throughout the world. This crisis has produced a test of leadership. With no good options to combat a novel pathogen, countries were forced to make hard choices about how to respond. Here in the United States, our leaders have failed that test. They have taken a crisis and turned it into a tragedy," end quote. Our greatest national failure in this pandemic has been a moral one. Failure to have established a functioning and widely available healthcare system. Failure to assuage as best we can the economic disaster that so many of our fellow citizens are suffering. Failure to care for the traditionally oppressed. Failure to care for each other by taking minimal safety precautions. Failure to look reality in the face. As a nation, we turned away. There was no listening. And for those with a social conscience, this is an unforgivable tragedy. At one time in the Western world, there was talk of three ingredients in making up a human being: body, mind, and soul. Some Westerners still talk this way, sometimes as metaphor, and sometimes they really mean it. Now, the fact is, it's still an open question whether or not the mind is what the brain does, and many of us have stopped calling the conscience by that other term, the soul. But the fullest metaphorical consideration of the soul, mind, spirit, consciousness, conscience matrix in the Western tradition is actually a very old story. It's the myth of Psyche and Aphrodite and Eros. Now, Psyche means breath in Greek, or animating force, and it came to designate for the ancient Greeks the term that in English we called soul, S-O-U-L, which actually was a word derived from Old English and etymologically tied to the word for sea, S-E-A. Why? Well, it appears that when Christian missionaries began talking about the psyche in Northern Europe, the Northern Europeans translated that word in their own minds into Saul, S-A-W-O-L, soul nowadays. because they believed the dead lived forever in the waves of the sea. That's where soul comes from. Psyche comes from the south. Anyhow, the story goes that Psyche was a princess of outstanding beauty. She was so beautiful that she aroused the jealousy of the god of love, Aphrodite. Now, Aphrodite called on her son when she got jealous, and he was named Eros, or the Romans called him Cupid. Now, she called on Eros to put a spell on Psyche, and Eros, he always carried a quiver of arrows and 2 potions with him. All right. Eros found the sleeping Psyche and sprinkled one of the potions on her, the one that his mom wanted him to do. And that was a potion which was supposed to make all potential spouses forever loathe poor Psyche. All right. And so as Eros turned to leave her bedroom, one of his arrows slipped from its quiver and struck Psyche, which woke her up. She looked up, and immediately she falls in love with Eros. Now, Eros is so flustered by his clumsiness that he rushes to grab the arrow, and he pricks himself on it, and of course that makes him fall hopelessly and instantly in love with Psyche. Now, feeling guilty about having followed his mother's rather jealous orders, Eros anoints Psyche with the other potion that he carries with him, the one that grants lifelong happiness. Now, sure enough, as the days wore on, no one would marry Psyche. And while Psyche cared not a whit about that, she was happy, right? Her parents weren't under that spell, and they were very concerned and went to consult an oracle about the problem. Now, the oracle said that no mortal would ever marry poor Psyche, but there was one hope, a mysterious creature who lived at the top of the tallest mountain in the neighborhood. He would marry Psyche. And so, because her parents wanted it so badly, Psyche alone climbed that big tall mountain. And what did she find there but a magnificent palace? And she felt a presence there, and that presence said, "My dear Psyche, I will love you forever, but I will only come to you in the darkness, and you must never, ever look upon my face." Now, as you might suspect, that mystery man was, in fact, Eros. Now, Psyche and her mysterious lover live in complete contentment on that mountaintop in their beautiful palace, until one day Psyche's sisters comes to visit. And they look around and see how radiant and happy their sister is and what joyful surroundings that she lives in. And you know what? They feel jealous. And so they begin to taunt her. "You mean you've never even seen this mystery man? What if he's a monster? You don't want to be living with a monster, do you? I'll bet he has some pretty disturbing plans in mind for you," they said. Well, Psyche grew quite concerned, and she asked her sisters about the best course of action. Well, they said, put a lamp beside the bedside, and when he's fast asleep, pick that up and take a very good look at just what kind of thing he is. And so, that night, Psyche follows the advice of her sisters. When her lover was fast asleep, she lit the lamp and looked into his face, and what should she see but the most beautiful of the gods, Eros himself. But at that moment, Eros starts awake, and seeing that what Psyche has done, he dashes out the window and flies away, and just as suddenly as he's gone, the palace disappears. So, despite her spell of happiness, Psyche is devastated at that loss of Eros. So, she prays in the temple of Aphrodite and says that she will do anything to get Aphrodite to forgive her. And so, Aphrodite assigns Psyche 3 tasks. The first task was separating a barn full of grain, barley, and wheat. She's supposed to get all of those seeds separated, and there are billions and billions of seeds. Now, Aphrodite knows that Psyche can't do that task. And yeah, Psyche does despair, but Eros intervened and ants come and do the work. They help her out because they know that Psyche has a pure heart, a pure conscience. She means well. I don't have to say that Aphrodite was furious, and so of course she's going to assign Psyche another more difficult task, this time bringing back a handful of the Golden Fleece. Now these sheep were not normal sheep. They were very violent kinds of sheep, and Psyche was afraid when she gets there, but the shepherd of those sheep have pity on Psyche and advise her to wait until the sheep goes to sleep in the noonday sun when it's very hot. And she does, and this works, and the shepherd helps her get some of that fleece because he knows that Psyche has a pure heart, a pure conscience. She means well. Well, Aphrodite doesn't mean well. She's completely furious at this point, and she assigns a truly impossible task: bring back a cup of water from the river Styx, the great river of death. And so, yeah, Psyche walks to the river and peers out into the violent, boiling water, and she despairs. But an eagle is flying by and sees her, and this eagle has pity on her, takes Psyche's cup and flies out, gets some of the water, and flies it back to Psyche, because the eagle knows that Psyche is a person of pure conscience, and so the eagle wants to help. Aphrodite, however, is furious because she knows Psyche couldn't do this one alone. And so she says, one final task. Now she's cheating, right? She's already had 3. So this is number 4. She said, one final task. You will need some makeup when you wed my son Eros. So you go down to Hades and get some from the queen of hell, Persephone. Oh, so Psyche, she is desperate with terror, and she does indeed head off, however, and trudges into the deep darkness of Hades, where Persephone, the queen, is surprised to see her. But Persephone is always missing her own daughter, and so in sorrow she hands Psyche a box. And here, child, says Persephone, take this. There's only one deal. You can't look inside until after you have left Hades. Okay. Persephone also can see that Psyche is very pure of heart. She has a clear conscience. Well, Psyche trudges back through Hades, but as she walks, she looks at that box, and she walks, and her curiosity grows stronger, and her curiosity grows stronger, and finally she just can't take it anymore, and Psyche opens up the box that's supposed to be makeup, and inside is only darkness, the deepest sort of darkness, and Psyche slips into the deep sleep of death. Now, Eros is watching, and he sees what happens, and he rushes to his mother Aphrodite. You must save my poor Psyche, Eros says, and if you don't, I will never go to Earth again. I will never shoot another of my arrows at anyone in the human race, and the human beings will never feel passion, and no more children will ever be born. And you know what they do? They worship you, mother. When the children are all gone, no one there to worship you. So, a very serious threat from Eros. And Aphrodite can see that he does mean business. And so she gets a cup of ambrosia and says, okay, take this to your love and have her drink it, which Psyche does, and she becomes immortal. And it has a happy ending here. Zeus himself unites the couple in marriage there and then, and Eros and Psyche live forever in bliss. And in the Greek version of the myth, they have a daughter, Hedone, and in the Roman version of the myth, they have a daughter named Voluptua. Okay, what is all of that myth saying? For one thing, it's saying the human essence, the soul, the psyche, the conscience is immortal despite the jealousy of the gods, because we human beings have erotic love to perpetuate the human race. For another, erotic love can lead to the best and the worst of human experiences. For another, the pure human psyche is absolutely gorgeous. For another, we need to consider the motives of others. Helping, jealousy. Helping, jealousy. For another, we should refrain from asking too many questions when we find true happiness. And notice the trials that Psyche meets and how she overcomes them. She gets help because she means well. Her intentions, her conscience means well. It is good in the world. In the face of all that life can throw at us, meaning well, doing what we do conscientiously, well, you know what? That is the human superpower. And I think that old myth is not a bad lesson at all. The story is about doing things for the right reasons, and it is about reaching out to others. The place of human beings in the cosmos is a question answered in a particular way by liberal religion and humanism. If the theory of natural selection is how we developed, then the answer to the question of our place is that humans do not have a special place or role among other animals on this planet, except insofar as we are the most destructive creatures on the planet due to our ability to plan and execute large projects. Now, in this case, then, I think that responsibility toward the flourishing of humans, sentient beings, and the planet is the ethical human purpose and meaning in life. At minimum, the ability to destroy the planet as we know it, which is very clearly, unfortunately, in the hands of human beings. We can see that now. That ability to destroy creates an obligation to work against that outcome. That feeling of responsibility is where our hope comes from in this pandemic. It's where our hope comes from in climate change and in voting. We have a responsibility to hope because we have a conscience. That feeling arises from, we can call it soul, we can call it psyche, we can call it conscience, but we have it, and therein lies our hope, our meaning, and our purpose. Join me from home.